I'm Leland Adams.
Darren Askey.
And our other team members are Gina, Peter, and Trevor.
And we're here to present our case study for the MBA555 class from on Kaiser Permanente, attempt to enter the transplant market.
Kaiser Permanente, what they tried to do is they tried to create some value by integrating. They were really good at the pre- and post-op care, and they want to integrate the surgeries into one facility.
So they minimized paperwork being shuffled around and lost, and thought they could have a better continuum of care by keeping the patients in the one facility. However,
didn't quite turn out that way.
No, failure. They learned by failed lessons of not being prepared.
So they ended up with no training. They didn't have any data integrity with their records and patient
policies,
information.
Procedures, no way to track patients or track organs for that matter. They didn't use a vital resource, the UNOS, which is United Network of Organ.
It's the integrated database for the organ network,
yeah,
where all the organs go. And
they offer resources for procedures and policies on how to follow up on patients and that for organizations as well.
Well, and they didn't have any way to document the customer satisfaction with it. With an organ transplant, it's probably kind of important,
I would think.
So now they have two strategic questions facing the company. The first one is what is the best method to kind of regain and then maintain their data integrity?
Save face, to put it shortly.
And yeah, and then the other one, to how to minimize the lawsuit, the costly lawsuits they're going to face.
Right.
So when you look at their vision, mission, and strategic focus, what they really wanted to do is they were trying to create a place where everybody would be the preferred place for for kidney transplant. And their strategic focus was, they had built a reputation for really excellent pre and post care, and then they were trying to figure out how to integrate that and capitalize on it and use it during the transplant as well. So essentially, it was a failed program. It really didn't work out very good.
Right, only 3 years in the running.
You look at the statistics, and on the chart, it shows a dramatic increase in the deaths and a decrease in actually organ, the transplants that they were doing.
Right. So the mortality after transplant was, the survivability was poor.
Well, and that's because their paperwork was so goofed up. They were keeping people on dialysis longer, which resulted in...
Or was they didn't take into consideration the studies that were produced by the University of Michigan. They studied 73,000 patients that the longer they were on dialysis, the poorer they did after
the transplant. Yeah.
So Kaiser, because they had a poor data system, they were keeping their patients waiting for organs, or they couldn't find organs in time to do the transplants.
So essentially the performance was just poor. So when we look at their functional analysis, Kaiser overall, like we talked about, you said they're that huge company and they have 169,000, almost 170,000 employees. So they got a lot of employees, it's a big company, and this was probably a really small part of their overall operation.
They only had 2 competitors.
Yeah, and they were trying to absorb them, kind of, forcing the patients to go from them. They were holding the patients hostage, right, by their health care plan.
Yeah. You can't have a kidney.
You can't have a kidney
until
unless you
we give it to you.
Yeah, and we're not going to do that.
Yeah. Can't have mine.
Yeah. So their long-range objective was really to become the patient's choice location to have a kidney transplant done, and it
have
didn't
up
work
their
very
pre
well.
and post and follow-up care.
So their ultimate goal was now their ultimate goal is just to do the pre and post-op and try to go back to where they were with minimizing that damage. Their current strategy, we talked about, they want to minimize the lawsuits and try to preserve their reputation, right? But now what they want to do is, instead of that transplant center, they want to figure out how to go from the reactive mode maybe to the proactive mode. That would really be their strategy now, right?
Yeah, hopefully, but they have to do some defensive.
Yeah, back out gracefully and then try to be proactive and see
recover.
if they can recover.
Yeah.
They want to create a database and be able to track the 2,300 people they have.
Right. and have a data transfer of patients, how long they've been on the waiting list for organ placement.
Yeah, and then they want
recipients and
a 24-hour hotline for the customers to be able to call in if they have a problem.
Right.
Which these are probably things they should have done on the very first go-around.
Right. To get feedback to reevaluate and readjust their plan. So
at this point, we'd probably want to take a look at the Porter's 5 forces. And so, so the first one would be the barriers to entry.
Well, the barriers, they had 2 competitors, so there wasn't, really in the looking at the ability to enter the market with only 2 competitors, it looked pretty favorably. But on the supplier end of bargaining power of suppliers, because of their poor performance, they could have barriers in supplies that the organ procurement people would not offer organs that came available to the facility, because they'd give it to the facility that had the best record or the best outcomes.
And they didn't integrate with that United Network Organ Database.
Right.
So how would they know what organs were available and really to be effective?
Right.
You'd have to have a good supply, and
so they had poor matching data.
Yeah, poor matching data.
Yeah, and substitutes for or threats to the service, Kaiser, there wasn't really any.
Well, the only substitute for a kidney transplant is really dialysis, right?
Which means the longer you're on dialysis, the poorer you do after transplant anyway.
The less likely you are to make it.
Right,
yeah.
Right. And then the buyer's bargaining power.
So they really didn't have any, right? Because Kaiser was holding them hostage. So Kaiser would say, hey, if you don't use our facility, you won't get coverage.
Yeah, use our kidney or no kidney at all.
Well, not just the kidney, but their whole facility.
Right.
And then we won't give you a kidney.
That's right.
Yeah.
So
the suppliers, and that's why the guy in the article, he went storming in there and said, hey, I'm not leaving until I see somebody. And they said, I'm sorry, sir, we just can't help you. So, they were almost hostages of the system. I think that last quarter we took that class, and remember they had the book Orbiting the Giant Hairball?
Right.
And they were, so they talked about
orbiting on the outside?
Yeah, well, no, they're on the inside of the hairball. All the Kaiser Permanente people, they were so entangled in the processes and procedures of their organization.
These transplant people were circling around in orbit.
They couldn't get in and get there. They became immobile. They became ineffective, and they couldn't do their job.
That's right.
So what are the critical issues that Kaiser faces?
Well, they should have, and they still should, probably integrate technologies between 2 companies or between databases to match patients and
use the single source of data to try to get them to integrate that.
Follow through patients. Have a project scope and boundaries or processes and procedures.
Well, they should have had a quality control method. They should have had a quality control process where the entire thing, and not just the actual surgery itself, but handling the patients coming in, the pre, the post-care, and the surgical care, and the data.
Right.
All of that should have been encompassed within their quality control processes.
Right.
Yeah, the reactive metrics they should have used internal proactive metrics that told them how they were doing as they went along. Like, how many records did we do and how good was that going? But what they really did is they waited to see how many people didn't make it or how many kidney failures there were, and that was their metric. So it was more of a post metric than a...
Right. And they had the government agencies knock on the door and say, you guys aren't doing very well, you're going to have to shut down.
Well, and they ended up having to make a huge disbursement from a costly lawsuit. So some of the stuff they could have done, they could have assessed the whole scope of the project and managed it like a project plan with a work breakdown structure, a timeline.
Metrics, breaking it into phases.
Identified the key players.
Right.
Had everybody involved in their phase.
Create a work breakdown structure.
Yeah, so they could have said, here's the integrated data piece.
Right.
Here's the surgical piece. Here's the metric. Here's the records piece. Here's the patient management piece, and each one of those could have had all their subtasks underneath there identified.
And identify role responsibilities, so somebody would be assigned to follow through with patients.
Yeah, and accountability.
Right.
I think anytime they take on a task like this, because of the monumental impact it can have on their reputation, they really need to carefully consider that and do a lot more pre-planning.
Any project should be considered with plan. Benjamin Franklin said, if you have no plan, you're planning for disaster.
Yeah, and they didn't have a plan.
Disaster happened.
Ready, fire, aim. So next time maybe it'll be ready, aim, fire.
Not my kidney.
Okay, yeah.